Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today for this latest Entuity Tech Talk. Before we go ahead and get started with our subject for today, just a quick bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have a question at all throughout today's presentation that you'd like our solutions architects to take a look at and speak to you about, please feel free to include that in the chat feature of this webinar. You can also put it in the Q&A portion as well, and we'll do our best to address any of those questions that you have later on in the presentation. Today's topic is going to be focused on enhancing application monitoring using Entuity. And I'm joined this evening this afternoon by a group of some amazing people here with Entuity. Lee Walker, he is our VP of Product Development for Entuity. This is his first time actually joining us for a tech talk, but he's got 19 plus years experience with Entuity. So we're very fortunate to have Lee. And of course, I'm sure you all know Pete and John from our solutions architects team. Very fortunate to have them here as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lee to get us started with a quick introduction before we get into the topic.
Sure. Thanks, John. So yeah, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So as you know, today we're going to be talking about application monitoring and how you can use the Entuity software to give you some insights into the applications that are running on your network, how those applications are performing, and how to identify network issues that could be impacting those applications and ultimately the end user experience. Now, before we jump into some great demos that John and Pete have got for you this afternoon, I just want to make it clear from the outset that Entuity is not a traditional application performance monitoring tool. So rather, Entuity complements those tools by offering a network perspective to application monitoring. And by this, I mean that the traditional APM tools, they often use complex synthetic transactions to mimic user interactions. They often instrument services by inserting code snippets into applications code base, which allows them to provide kind of end-to-end tracing of application requests, identifying issues with the individual components that make up and deliver that service, like servers, microservices, databases, etc. However, those APM tools often don't provide a great insight into the network upon which those transactions all run. And if you listen to Gartner, then they'll tell you that the network is often the cause of the outage. Typically 30% of the time, network outages are the cause of application outages or performance issues. So certainly not something to overlook. Now, this is where obviously Entuity can jump in. They help fill the gap. As I said, we complement APM tools with our deep network knowledge, and we can show how applications are actually using the network, and by contrast, therefore, how the network can be affecting those applications. And of course, Entuity also provides a selection of effective features to directly monitor the application availability and performance as well. Now, before we jump into our first demo, I believe, John, we are going to throw out a quick poll to see what tools the various attendees are using today. So if the attendees can just click their responses to that poll when it pops up, that would be much appreciated.
Great. That poll's live.
Excellent. Okay. So people can do that in the background, but I did say that Entuity can monitor application availability and performance directly, not just the network on which it runs. So let's start with that. And indeed, it can also monitor the validity of your application's security certificates too. So John's got a really good demo for this. John, do you want to show that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. And here, I'm going to actually give you a sneak peek into a bit of functionality that we're going to be introducing in patch 5 of version 22 of Entuity. That'll be in the April timeframe. In version 22 already, we have SSL certificate monitoring capability under the general heading of web applications. You can add multiple servers. They can be local to your organization. They might be out on the internet, but you can add them to have their certificate validity checked and to determine how many days it is until the certificate expires. You can get events and incidents raised to warn you when you're hitting certain thresholds of the certificates getting close to expiration. You'll notice that this one for CBS, for NBC News, and for Park Place itself are under 60 days. We've got that set as the early warning threshold. That causes the icon here to be shown in orange instead of the standard green. And if it dropped below 30 days, which is the default for the critical level, it's going to open up an incident associated with that, and you'll see a red icon as well. That's the existing functionality. We've shown you that before. However, in patch 5, we're taking this to another league. And what we've done here is given you the ability to put in a full-blown URL, not just the name of a server. And at that point, it is going to regularly access that URL. And note, this can be over HTTPS, which takes this beyond the capability of Cisco's IPSLA operations, which traditionally have been used for web response monitoring. They only support HTTP. This can work with a secure web server. And you will notice we're pulling back a bunch of metrics associated with that pulling down of that web page. Now, if I were to drill in to that device, you will see here that that application, and this was the URL that we were pulling back from it. We've got a bunch of metrics that have been brought in addition to the days till the cert expires. We've got the response size that came back, the time it took to get the first byte of data back from that request, and the overall total time, which included resolving the name to an IP, making a connection to the web server, and then pulling back that that page from the web server. Down the bottom here, we've taken the various different timings that we're pulling in and shown them together in a time chart here, so that you can get an idea of when you've got excessive times if you are having problems with the slow page delivery, and you've got all of that history available. So there's a lot of very rich metrics coming back here on the timing side. You'll see them listed down the bottom here that are being gathered from that operation. Now, the initiation of that request is from the nominated Entuity server that you're running that on. In a multi-server environment, you can pick which server you're going to initiate these tests from, and you can have different tests being initiated from different servers. But it does give you that ability to get the indication of whether or not you're getting that page delivered, and if you are, how rapidly, and the other sub-timings within it. So that said, I'm going to pass it back to you, Lee.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, John. So, so straight, I mean, there's some really cool, some cool information there, and as John said, that is coming out in our next kind of release, which should be due soon. But straight away, you can see that Entuity can easily monitor some, key business applications that you may rely on, and you can get alerted to when they're not hitting their availability or performance targets. So pretty simple but effective stuff. So the question is, when there is an issue, what's causing the issue? What's causing the slowdown? And this is where Entuity's SurePath technology comes in. For anybody who's not used that already, it just offers detailed visibility into the path that application traffic is actually taking across the network. And that's going to help you pinpoint bottlenecks, latency issues, and packet loss. And it can also help you to, mark a known preferred route through the network, or conversely, an unwanted route, either for performance or for security reasons. And crucially, it covers both your internal private network and even goes out across your provider's network and out to the internet. So you get a full end-to-end path tracing, It's going to help you pinpoint the cause of any problems and allow you to get to the people that you need to solve those issues. So again, I think the best way to actually see this is with a demo. And Pete, I think you've got something to show us.
Yeah, I think, Lee, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I think you've got a couple of use cases that we've run into internally where SurePath has actually had some benefit. But let me show you. Let's take a look at what this is. So, we spend, within the infrastructure space, managing networks and so forth. You look at a lot of detail, and you spend a lot of time understanding what's happening within your environment. I'm ultimately on calls almost every day, and the question is, something's happening, and it's always the network's fault. So the question is, how do you answer questions, especially as organizations are moving into, SaaS-based applications? And how do you answer the question of it's slow? And SurePath, from that end-to-end path tracing methodology, gives you the ability to look at what does it take to get from some point to something, as you would say here, Office 365 as an example. So SurePath is an agent-based technology. So you can, I'll work with healthcare companies, and we had a really good use case from one healthcare company, and that was from a hospital. It was really slow to get to something as simple as Office 365. And you look at the network, you talk to your provider, you look at, the provider looks at their network. Obviously, you can't talk to Microsoft because, they're going to take care of their own system. But this is where SurePath actually gives you some visibility. So I'm going to select a path. SurePath allows you to start at some point. Now, right now, I'm starting in AWS. But I could actually have an agent. It's a lightweight agent. It'll run on Linux. It'll run on Windows. And you can have that located at a location. So put it in a hospital, put it in a clinic, put it at a factory floor, put it in a building at a university, put it at a bank, in a financial institution, put it wherever you'd like to. And then from that starting point, look at what your users are going to see in terms of getting to Office 365. But look at it in terms of what is the network path that's taken. So, you'll see this as an example. This is a live example coming out of AWS going to Office 365. One of the things that we'll do is try to identify all the nodes that are actually responding to that destination. So in my case here, and in reality, in our case, Office is responding with about 20 different servers. Each one of these servers is going to have that path tracing method that's going to be run at least 5 times. So I've got 20 servers, 20 times 5 is about 100. I'm actually trying to simulate as many different ways that my users are getting from a location, from an office building, from the data center, from wherever it is, to Office 365. And we're going to look, as Lee mentioned, we're going to look at latency, try to identify where the problems are. Now, it could be that I'm seeing problems within my infrastructure, but in my case here, I'm actually hopping right into AWS and then over into Microsoft, all the way over to the responsive nodes. We're going to track this over time. We're going to alert in the cases where you've got a high latency measurement. If you've got something where it's high for one 5-minute segment, and then it falls back down, you can suppress those alerts. But you're looking at this from a timing perspective to identify, do my customers actually see slowness, and is it in my space? Is it in my service provider space, or is it in the SaaS space? Now, the other things that you can do with SurePath would be identify different nodes and different routes that you should either always see or never see. So say, for example, if you've got a remote site with multiple egress ports, right? You've got a active scenario about 2 different providers. But for voice traffic, or for traffic to SAP, you always want to follow one route. In that case, set that device up as a required node, because I should always see that. If the routing path diverts from this, where you're going a different way, it's going to alert you. You still might be within a latency measurement, but you might find that you're outside of some type of a policy that says traffic should go one direction or another. Now, when I look at this, I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, I'm generating events. I need to be notified where I've actually got some issues. Now, I've got some path deviations. I've got high latency. Again, I'm correlating 54,000 or 200 events into something that can be actionable. But I'm also leveraging my path and the knowledge of what's happening across, those two endpoints into something that we would call an Entuity service. So my service definition says, from New York, how well do my users work the way they're supposed to work? So do the devices they connect to, does the connectivity to my service providers work? But also, how well do they get to Office 365, and is there an impact? So again, you're taking something like a path, the path knowledge and the path alerting, and you're leveraging a service model behind it to say, yep, I've got a problem in New York and it happens to be Office 365 related. Now, I mentioned, the agents for SurePath can be put anywhere. So you can actually have an agent sitting at different locations, and it's really easy to set that up. And they all get organized and coordinated through the Entuity server itself. I think with that, Lee, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I mean, I love this feature because it's so visual, and to me, a picture paints 1,000 words. That the path that is being taken between 2 points is just fantastic to see. And like you say, Pete, we've got so many good user stories, shall we say, of where this has been successful. One internally for us, I feel compelled to share is, we had several years ago now, because SurePath is several years old. We continue obviously to develop it, but it's we used to get intermittent reduction in the audio quality of our phone calls. We used an IP phone system, and the system itself was up. And because it's intermittent, it's also very difficult then to resolve. It's not a continuous problem. But when we threw SurePath at this, the problem immediately became clear. And it was basically that the path our voice traffic was taking went out of our network onto our provider's network. And we had, a fiber connection, but also a backup link, which was much slower. And the path intermittently changed to the backup link every 30 to 60 minutes. And that would affect our telephone calls for, 5-10 minutes at a time, which was just, not a good place to be for a business. Again, SurePath immediately pinpointed the problem. We called our service provider and they identified it as a configuration issue, which they then fixed. Problem went away. But what we then did was we mapped that path as a known good path, and conversely, the backup link should be one that we don't want to go across, and to alert us if it ever did. So we didn't need to keep an eye on that directly ourselves, because Entuity was doing it for us, and we would know in 5 minutes if that link ever went over to another path. So yeah, very cool technology. So with that, so we've seen how we can monitor apps, our certificates. We've looked at how we can then look at the network and identify the dependencies those apps have on the network, pinpoint potential issues. Next up, we'd like to demonstrate, Entuity's built-in flow analyzer. So it's not a separate installation. It's all part of the same installation. And our flow analyzer and our NBAR support allow us to see, how our network's actually being used, what applications are actually running across our network. So who's talking to who, what applications they're using, how much data is being sent, when they're talking to each other and for how long. With NBAR, we can even take advantage of the device's deep packet inspection to identify specific applications that run over the same protocol, like HTTP or HTTPS, for example. And of course, again, the visualization of that is really good for understanding, potential cause of congestion or bottlenecks on our network. So I think, Pete, you're up again to just demo NetFlow and NBAR.
Yeah, let's take a look at flow to start with. So, I mean, you look at your infrastructure. You can use SurePath to identify, the route that traffic is taking between two points. But from a flow perspective, being able to look at what is consuming the traffic at a site. So from a use case perspective, it's actually pretty straightforward. If I looked at something that, if I can find some port utilization. So if I have some high port utilization, I'm sure I've got something here because this is a very active environment. But I've got a site in New York that is showing, high utilization on a WAN circuit. that's fine. I can look at what it's doing. I can see the traffic. But if I have access to flow analytics, I can very quickly look at who's consuming that traffic. So what are the conversations? So by default, again, I'm looking at the conversations. I'm looking at, talkers, listeners, who's talking at both ends, and I'm identifying who the busiest ones are. Who are the consumers? Now, if these are just DNS resolved names, if these are actually wired connections, I could search for those to find out what they're connected into, but I can see who they are. And if I want to narrow this down just a bit, I'm going to build a quick filter and actually turn the cube a bit to say, what are the applications that they're using? So very dynamic. From an operational use case, I see high traffic. Let's look and let's see who's consuming that or what's consuming that. Now, when you look at flow in this terms, it's, I'm looking at a web application type. So I'm not really drilling into what the web applications are that are part of this. Although you could look at talkers and listeners, to get kind of destination and source IP addresses around that. But again, from a flow perspective, this could be something that you'd like to see and have it emailed to you on a regular basis. Just set it up as a report. This as a templatable report is in the system, just like any other report in Entuity. It can be scheduled, it can be run, it can be emailed over to you on a regular basis. Or if I'm just looking at it one time, dump it as a PDF. So very quickly analyze operationally what I'm seeing. If I like to see this on a regular basis, have it send me the story on a regular basis. Now that's really on the application side. So Lee, you mentioned NBAR as more of a deep packet inspection. So NBAR support is also there. So if the device supports NBAR, this is something that will automatically start to discover. Now there's a little bit of setup involved in defining the applications that you want to be able to pull and blacklist. But in this case, if I go back to the beginning of this one, we'll just select HQ01, the standard NBAR dashboard that you'll see in Entuity. If this device is actually picking up NBAR details, I can see the interfaces that I'm collecting from, and I can actually select and edit the application types that I should pull for. So you don't have to pull for anything. Often you're going to pull for some specific things. If I want to drill into the application or into the interface itself, I'm going to look at that individual application detail. All right, let's refresh this. And I got no data on that port. That's interesting. Take a look at my DMZ port. The great part about a demo, I'm picking up no details. But in this case, you're going to see an application breakout over time. So this is a stacked area chart that's actually going to show you the pulled applications that you're picking up and the blacklisted applications. Now, one of the things that you'll notice too about a blacklisted application, once you nominate this as a blacklist, if you see traffic, if I see telnet traffic on this interface or on this device, it's going to generate an alert. So I can actually see a blacklisted alert saying, I'm seeing traffic here, I shouldn't be. So you're not just using the performance data, but you're using the alerts that you can get from NBAR and that blacklisted method. We'll try this one more time to see if it comes up. If it doesn't, I'll turn it back over to you. All right, yeah, it's not going to show for today. It's not happy today. So, Lee, I'll turn it back.
Well, Pete, that's a demo. You've just proven Murphy's Law.
Live demos.
Once again. Again, some great stuff. And like you say, the really cool thing with the NBAR application monitoring is that you can list applications you don't want to see. If there are certain applications, YouTube, for example, or Doom or whatever, you don't want to see on your network. Very easy to blacklist those, and one packet of traffic will raise an alert and tell you exactly where it's coming from in combination with NetFlow analysis. There is a question as to how scalable our flow analyzer is, and I believe we look in our doc, we say it's something like 50,000 flows per second comfortably, and that's on the same server that's doing all of the monitoring your network. Again, no separate server required, but that just for everyone's information is based on what we consider to be a reasonable time to analyze the collected data and render a report on demand. In actual fact, we weren't able to push enough flows per second at the server to cause it to buckle, should we say. So it could collect much more than that. And if you're willing to wait a little bit longer for a dashboard to generate from 10 seconds to 30 seconds, for example, then you can certainly collect and analyze much more than 50,000 flows a second. So it's pretty scalable.
And it's also worth noting, Lee, that in that case, if you've got multiple servers, so it's a multi-server deployment, that each server has that limit. So if you're sending flows to multiple Entuity servers which are managing different devices, each server has the flows associated with the devices that it is monitoring, that 50,000 can be multiplied by n-fold, that your overall environment can handle a lot more than 50,000.
Yeah, you're right, John. And in fact, that applies to everything that Entuity does. Entuity is very much, massively scalable and can scale horizontally. Every single server that you deploy does its own monitoring, does its own data collection. And it's only really at the point that we render the results into a dashboard does that data get collected on demand, just the data it needs to render the dashboard. And hey presto, it renders it in a single UI. So you could have 50 servers out there all collecting and doing their own work, fully distributed, all through one user interface. So yeah, you get that scalability, and Flow benefits from that as well. So on to the next thing that we want to show you is our user-defined poller or custom poller. So our customers are not limited to support that we offer out of the box in terms of the data that we collect or the metrics that we collect. And you can easily extend that data that's collected from any system that supports either REST or SNMP directly through our graphical user interface in the web UI. Now that opens up the possibility for you to, support so many applications and systems that today do more frequently provide or more commonly provide REST API access. And once that data is obviously in our product, and of course you're free to use it to create any dashboards, any reports, events, and so on that you see fit. And again, I'm going to hand it right back to you, John, because I think you've got a great demo of this.
I have, and what we're going to take a look at, I've shown you this before in previous presentations, but I just want to talk about it again. This is an example of a source of data. It might be an instrumented application. So we've already today talked about the measuring the responsiveness over the network of a web-based application. We've got the tracing of the traffic through the network using SurePath. We've got the identification of the mix of applications that are happening using Flow and NBAR. This is where we further can give you information. If you've got an instrumented app that's got a REST API, then we can allow you to pull in whatever it is that you want from it. This happens to be openweathermap.org, which is containing worldwide weather statistics. I'm pulling in data from Ohio with temperature, wind speed, pressure, humidity, and cloudiness being pulled in on a 5-minute polled basis and maintained for a while in the database. You can set up thresholds. Basically, consider that an application that is pulling the data in. I'm going to show you how that was configured within the user-defined REST poller. Here I've got an example here with the open weather map. If I were to edit that, then this is defining my poll rate and how long I'm keeping the data. We take a look at how the data comes in. This is a very simple example. There's one operation that is polling the data. You provide a URL that you're pulling the data in. In this case, that's actually authenticated with a key that was provided by openweathermap.org that I'm providing in the URL. It could have been provided using credentials that you would set up here. If you've got REST API that maybe uses something like a bearer token, then that can play into the whole authentication scheme. I'll show you some of that in a moment. But in this case, it's just pulling back metrics. These are some of the metrics that come back, and with those were just pulled from, in this case, a JSON body that came back from that URL. And we pulled out the various information, the temperature, the cloudiness, etc., and assigned attributes for them that are then stored in the Entuity database along with everything else that we store, which means it's available for dashboards, for reporting, for the event generation system. It's all available to play along with everything else. Let me just take the opportunity to go in, and I'm going to show you another example of a REST API polling that I've got set up here. This one is pulling information from the Park Place Central Park system, which is the third-party hardware maintenance portal for which we have a public API. If I were to show you how this one works, then I've got this set up with two steps. First of all, we have to go through an authentication step. This is using Okta, and this is allowing you to provide the credentials that Park Place would give you to access the public API, the result of which is that it returns a bearer token. And that bearer token is held in a variable. This access token here is held in a variable, which makes it available for the polling step. There's also a little bit of logic here that copes with the fact that this bearer token is valid for an hour. There's no need, if you are doing multiple requests, to go get yourself a bearer token for every single request. Provided your bearer token is less than an hour old, it will still be good. And so this logic says don't bother going and getting a bearer token if you've got one within the last hour. In fact, I said 3,000 seconds to be on the safe side. But once we've got the bearer token, it can then get itself used. And so here we've got a completely different URL. This is going in and pulling data back. You can do a test here with a test serial number. It comes back and gets used. And that then sets up various information that's coming back associated with your maintenance contract for each device that you've got in there. So for every device, you're saying for this serial number, what are my maintenance contract details, the SLA and all other information? What address do you have registered where this location, this device is located? So if we need to send you a spare part, where are we going to send those spare parts? So in that case, I set that up to then populate a dashboard that would have that extra information in. And so all of that information from Central Park was used to enrich information that we have already about those devices from polling the devices within Entuity. And that links together with a mechanism for automatically opening up tickets to request hardware maintenance when we detect a component failure in a device like a server or a storage system or a network device that we are monitoring. So that's just an example of where these REST APIs come into play to augment what you're doing. You can use them to further instrument what it is that you're monitoring. With that, I'm going to pass it back.
Yeah, and thanks, John. The thing I really like about those demos is that it shows how actually you've gone outside of networking really to pull in other completely what might seem like unrelated data to some people, but it could be really key to another. So it really, as we say, allows you to tailor the product and the data it collects to your business and what's important to you, mix and match that with the data we already collect on the dashboards and reports that you generate. So again, a really cool feature. Okay, so last up, but certainly not least, is our built-in support for webhooks. Now, the original use case for webhooks was really, as you might expect, for us to receive events from any system that happens to support webhook events. That was, to sit alongside things like traps and any events that we generate ourselves, or syslog event messages. But actually, Pete, you've got a great demo to show how you've used this feature to extend our monitoring to be able to alert on pretty much anything you want, certainly on a server basis. So, Pete, why don't you show everyone what you've done?
Yeah, this is a number of customers have come back with really good use cases from centered around I've got servers that are managing certain applications, and the health of that application is something that I can detect. So webhooks are a really good modern approach. The classic approaches from a Windows server would be look at something, maybe send an SNMP trap. From a Linux box, it'd be send a syslog message as an outbound notify. But webhooks are a really good way from a modern standpoint to do that server to Entuity alerting. So, I mean, this is just leveraging the webhooks custom capability that you've got. If I go to the custom webhooks, let's take a look at that. So I've got two webhook sets that are set up in the system. I'm going to focus on my firewall group first, because this is centered around a use case where we had a customer that said, we're running specific Windows tasks in the background, and we need to be able to alert when those tasks fail or when those processes fail. And the center of the universe for that is really around the Windows events. So we looked at the Windows event log, and we found that, yeah, there's classic events that are being generated when these processes or these tasks and applications are failing in some fashion. So I built a simulation around it. And actually what I used was a pretty easy one, which is I'm going to turn a firewall on and off on my Windows server. And I want to be notified on the Entuity side when somebody does that. So we've got a group set up. This is a webhook group that I've set up. And I've set up a target. There is a source that's going to actually be sending those alerts to me. Now, this is leveraging the Windows events methodology. So I've got a Windows events, and I'm tying a trigger and an action to an event. And you can pick any event in the Windows system. So any application that you're using, print spooler, some other application, a database. I just happen to be focusing on a firewall change. In my case, whenever that firewall is turned on or turned off, that event is actually running a PowerShell script. Simple PowerShell script. It's taking some standard Windows event attributes into the system, and it's generating a webhook and sending that webhook based on some authentication into the Entuity system. You can actually make this available as a template for folks if they want it as a follow-up. But whenever this fires off, it's sending me an alert. And I've got some payloads that I've been receiving that'll identify this, but effectively what I'm doing is generating an event. Whenever my firewall is disabled, whenever my firewall is enabled. I'm setting the events up as part of the webhook definition. Then I'm just correlating these together in an Entuity incident, and ultimately what you see is real-time notifications saying somebody turned off the firewall. Somebody turned on the firewall. So just like any other incident in the system, I'm seeing the repeated patterns for when this got turned off and when this got turned on. And if the data to identify who did it would be in the system, you can add that in. You can add any attributes into the details that you can pass along as part of that webhook detail set. So that's one really good example, and it's really a generic example because it looks at a notification system in Windows space that leverages, it's just a PowerShell invoke web request that's generating a webhook to send Entuity a note saying something's happened. Now let's flip this over and take a look at the Linux side. And there's actually, we did a TechTalk demo on this, so there's probably some more detail in some of the TechTalk history files. But this is actually a Linux version of a webhook that's just tracking every time somebody logs into the system. Tell me that somebody logged in. It's an SSH login. It's actually tied into the Linux system as just a bash script that is generating a webhook. And again, just a quick definition for what that one is. I'll just throw that one up on the screen. Again, very, very easy script. It's actually using a destination point and authentication to say, yeah, now from the Entuity standpoint, I'm going to accept that as an authenticated webhook. So not everybody can send it. You have to be validated to be able to allow the webhooks to come into the system. But this again is going to look at a login and a log off on a Linux server and generate an alert accordingly. And I can see every time that happens. So again, this is leveraging real-time notification from some generic application. These are just a couple good examples. I think, Lee, I'll turn it back over.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So again, a bit like the custom poller in a way, in that this is just another demonstration of how you can extend the product to meet your needs, to monitor your equipment, your services, your apps. Another really good example. Thanks, Pete. So with that, hopefully we've given you all some real ideas around how you can utilize the Entuity software to, again, help you gain insight into what applications are running on your network, monitor those applications for availability, performance, and the certificate expiry, to get alerts into deviations from known good paths or unwanted apps, to extend the product to collect extra metrics and telemetry that you want and you need for your business. And that said, we always know there's far more that we can do. I've seen some of the questions in the chat there, and we've tried to answer some. Others we'll take offline and we'll get back to you very soon as we've got the answer to that. But of course, we'd love to have your feedback on these features and any other ideas that you have for improvements into the product. We are all ears. So please do send your suggestions through to us. We listen to absolutely every single one. We're very much driven by our customers' requests. So please do share those with us in the future. And appreciate everybody listening to our demo today. Hopefully it's been useful.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lee. And in that same vein of enjoying to have feedback, if you have an idea for a future Tech Talk, we'd appreciate that. We love talking to what is interesting and important to all of you. So there's just been a poll dropped in the chat. So if you have an idea or request for a future Tech Talk topic, please feel free to drop that there. Some closing housekeeping items. If you want to make sure that you're invited to future Tech Talks and you get the first notification as to when those are taking place, please feel free to use the link that I'm sharing in the chat here now regarding subscription for end of service, or excuse me, not end of service life, for Tech Talk subscriptions. Feel free to register yourself, share it with members of your team so that you can make sure that you're included on those invites. And then following today's presentation, we will be sending out a recording of this talk. So expect that to be in your inbox either later today or first thing tomorrow morning. In there as well, there'll also be some instructions for submitting a review via G2. These reviews greatly help us with getting the word out about how great the product is. And if you've already submitted a review on G2, feel free to still use that link to update an existing review. That does help with the weighting and the relevancy of those reviews. So it looks like we've got few ideas trickling in here for Tech Talks. We'll leave that poll open for another minute. If there was a question or a point that you put in the chat that wasn't able to be addressed on the webinar today, we'll go ahead and follow up with you directly regarding that point. And I do want to take a moment again to thank Pete, John, and Lee for giving us their time today and sharing with us a few things about the platform. So greatly appreciate the time, gentlemen. Thank you as always. And we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you all for joining, and we'll talk to you on the next Tech Talk.